Going on, everyone? John Matrix here. So today we are going to take a look at some more Warhammer 40k. The last Warhammer video that we took a look at was from Arbitor Ians about the Badab War, and more specifically about the different iterations and rewrites, changes throughout the years from when it originally was written back in the late 80s up until, I guess, the last iteration that happened in the early mid 2000s, I think. So very interesting, very fascinating. I didn't know that there was another, you know, Astartes kind of civil war or uprising, whatever you want to call it, you know, other than the Horus heresy, and one that's, you know, I guess more grounded in more everyday needs or politics and stuff like that, as opposed to something that is, you know, empire shattering kind of a situation. But at the end of that video, he'd mentioned that he had another video on the Badab War going over the actual complete story and history about it. So that's what we're going to take a look at today. So I'm interested and eager to learn about the overall actual history of the war, the various factions, how it got started, you know, what the, I guess, current official story is for this Badab War. So we're gonna take a look at that. As always, links down below in the description for the original video without my commentary, reaction, etc. if you want to go check out that video, and to Arbitor Ians' channel. So go over there, check him out. He's a great content creator, makes a lot of great Warhammer 40k stuff. You should definitely give him, you know, a sub, give this video a like, all that kind of stuff. Show him some support. He's got a Patreon if you want to check out his Patreon. I also, if you would like to, you consider hitting the join button down below there for my YouTube member benefits. Check those out. See if any of that would have any kind of interest to you. There's a Discord that's open to everyone. I do a lot of these reactions live for my members, and we have a lot of discussions that we go, you know, have before, during, and after, etc., etc. So if any of that would have any interest to you, you know, check all that out. But for now, let's get into the video. Bada beep.
But Ian, aren't there already 40k lore videos about the Badab War, where someone drones on for 3 hours over a moving slideshow? You're not gonna make one of those, are you?
Yikes. Yikes. That's funny. That's funny. I don't care who you are, that's funny.
The Badab War is a recurring story in Warhammer 40k, an internal dispute that spirals into a localized civil war, and I really like how mundane it is. Rather than the usual fall to chaos, it's a story about the inefficiency of the Imperium. I have another video where I go...
See, and I like that too. It obviously shows that the Imperium, you know, isn't infallible. They're still just have, as... Just like today, there's still issues with bureaucracies and red tape and logistics and supplies and et cetera, that get in the way of sometimes getting things done and cause problems. And it just honestly makes the universe feel that more grounded. But, you know, I like the idea of, you know, a civil war or uprising, whatever, that is more kind of grounded in what would be considered, you know, regular stuff, and it's not some, you know, chaos, corruption, incursion, or some conspiracy of some alien race behind the scenes, you know, et cetera. It's just you know, issues have come to a boiling point and it's turned into a conflict.
Go through the various mentions about the inefficiency of the Imperium. I have another video where I go through the various mentions of Badab over the years and how it's evolved, but in this video I just wanted to go through the story from start to end, hopefully in about 20 minutes.
Which I guess if I can remember to do it, as I'm, you know, doing the editing, uploading, whatever, in the video, if I can remember, I'll link the other video he's talking about that I reacted to down below, so you can check that one out too. But anyway, let's continue.
This video, I just wanted to go through the story from start to end, hopefully in about 20 minutes. I'm going to break it down year by year, and I'm going to accompany it with a moving map, so hopefully it's easier to follow.
Tight.
So,
I like that.
Here we go.
Tight like a tiger. 3903.
Like everything in 40k, the seeds of the Badab War are sown hundreds of years before with the formation of the Maelstrom Warders. The Maelstrom was a massive and ancient stellar warp vortex close to the galactic core, an area where the warp and real space cross over, and the worlds within it were a haven for pirates, Xenos, and the forces of chaos.
See, in the other video that I had did the reaction, the previous one, he had mentioned in that video that the, you know, originally this had been written before they'd even started writing the Horus Heresy. So I had wondered if this was like a precursor to some other lore that had gone on, like the Maelstrom. I thought that maybe was a precursor to the Eye of Terror, Eye of Terror. And I thought this Badab world might have been a precursor to Cadia, and eventually along the line, everything had gotten rewritten to what it is. But it's completely different. It's another, you know, warp storm entrance and another world that's very similar. So interesting to know that. Interesting just to know that, you know what I mean?
And the worlds within it were a haven for pirates, Xenos, and the forces of chaos. The area around the Maelstrom, called the Maelstrom Zone, contained a huge amount of mineral wealth, so settlements had persisted close by. But attacks from within the Maelstrom were always an issue, and after the successful invasion and destruction of the hive world of Signax by a force of Chaos Space Marines, a decision was taken to station several Space Marine chapters in the zone. Founded in year 587 of the 41st millennium, these Maelstrom Warders chapters would consist of the Mantis Warriors, whose homeworld was already within the zone in the Endymion cluster, the fleet-based Lamenters and Channel Guard chapters, and would be led by the renowned Astral Claws, who took over an orbital station in the Badab system.
There's so many chapters too now. Like it, honestly, it was kind of hard enough for me to like really keep up with the, you know, 30k legions and who they belong to with their Primarchs and all those various characters, and now they split them up in all kinds of different chapters. And I would love to learn, you know, about all those chapters, and I guess what like legion origins they're from, etc. Like for example, the Minotaurs, it's a chapter that's been brought up some in the comments for me to take a look at because of my, you know, love for Greek mythology. So I had assumed or thought, you know, okay, it's the Minotaurs, they must be an offshoot from the Ultramarines, but apparently that might not be the case. There might be an actual a loyalist offshoot from one of the traitor legions, something like that. So I mean, that in itself is pretty fascinating, and like that makes me just want to learn more about them. So I will eventually get to the Minotaurs and stuff, but it's just there's so much to learn. You know, it's so much to learn. It gets a little overwhelming at times, but I love this stuff. I love jumping in and learning about, you know, these universes like this.
The renowned Astral Claws, who took over an orbital station in the Badab system. They'd be aided by a permanently stationed Imperial Navy squadron. In the century or so immediately following their formation, this was a great success, but after the Channel Guard were retasked elsewhere and a number of attacks made it out of the Maelstrom in the following years, the Astral Claws and Lamenters were heavily criticised by the Inquisition. This infuriated the chapters, who had been petitioning for a replacement to the Channel Guard for years at this point. A second, but less well-known seed would be planted when the Tiger Claws chapter reappeared 100 years later in 680, after being thought lost in the warp. The Tiger Claws were a successor of the Astral Claws, but on their return only a handful survived. But in 40k, chapters are required to send a portion of their gene seed back to Terra every so often for purity checks and as a sort of reserve. The Tiger Claws chapter master, Velata, went to Terra to request the release of the gene seed to rebuild the chapter, and mysteriously disappeared. The remaining Tiger Claws sought refuge with the Astral Claws and were...
I wonder what happened there. I wonder if there was like some kind of assassin thing. If, you know, because he'd mentioned that he came out of the warp, so maybe some Inquisitors got a hold of him and decided off him. Maybe he got imprisoned, or I don't know. That's interesting. That's interesting that he just mysteriously disappeared.
The remaining Tiger Claws sought refuge with the Astral Claws and were quietly reabsorbed into their parent chapter. Finally, in 715, Lufthuron, captain of the Astral Claws' 3rd Company, was appointed chapter master.
Now, I know each chapter is only supposed to be limited to 1,000 Astartes, but not every chapter like really follows that, right? Am I incorrect on that? You know what I mean? There are some chapters that have more numbers than that, right? Because you would think that, even though a lot of their numbers had been lost when they said they came back, you know, for these Tiger Claws to then be reabsorbed into the Astral Claws, you know, you would think that would probably exceed what the chapter limit's supposed to have. You know, I guess unless potentially the Astral Claws weren't up to their, I guess, allotted peak, if you could say.
Embarked of Turon, captain of the Astral Claw's third company, was appointed chapter master, and he embarked on a campaign to strengthen the warder chapters and the defences of the Maelstrom zone. He expanded the Badab fleet with captured corsair ships, increased their stockpile of armaments, and, after a brief civil war occurred over succession on Badab Primaris, took direct control of Badab.
So there's two little civil wars. There's that one over I guess rule of Badab, and then it expands out greater to other, you know, planets in the system, I guess. That's interesting.
Occurred over succession on Badab Primaris, took direct control of Badab, executing the ruling nobility and claiming the Badab sector as the Astral Claw's chapter fiefdom, to better protect these worlds and those souls who dwell upon them in the glory of the Emperor. He also sent petitions to Terra to request additional forces so that the Maelstrom could be subdued forever. His petitions were dismissed without full...
Right, I remember from the previous video that pretty much being like the main catalyst that sparked everything, is this dude wanted to basically make sure that the denizens of Chaos, Chaos Space Marines, etc. would have no chance of coming out through the Maelstrom at all. He wanted to secure it or destroy it, or seal it some kind of way, whatever. And he got denied that. And then that kind of, I guess he stopped sending the tithe that was required. And then, so that sparked off conflict with other chapters in the Nearing system because they needed certain supplies in order to maintain, you know, their status quo. And you know, one thing led to another, kind of a series of chain of events, if I remember correctly from his video.
Forces so that the Maelstrom could be subdued forever. His petitions were dismissed without full hearing. In protest, Huron withheld Badab's planetary tithe and blocked trade routes through the Maelstrom zone, citing the need for additional raw materials to defend the area and additional security. This caused a rift with the nearby Carthago.
So wait, he set up a blockade to take supplies, essentially pirate supplies coming in?
Blocked trade. In protest, Huron withheld Badab's planetary tithe and blocked trade routes through the Maelstrom zone, citing the need for additional raw materials to defend the area.
I mean, yeah, you would think that alone, just blocking trade and potentially, I guess, maybe stealing supplies, that alone would be something that the Imperium would want to deal with and punish, right? Like, that's a no-no.
Routes through the
let alone holding the tithe.
Need for additional raw materials to defend the area and additional security. This caused a rift with the nearby Carthago sector, whose administratum relied on those tithes. And this turns into what in essence is a legal dispute known as the Badab schism, between the clashing entitlement of the administratum to the imperial tithe and the ancient rights of Astartes commanders to defend the Imperium by any means necessary. It's also around this time that the Astral Claw's own gene seed submissions to Terra become infrequent. No reason is stated, but various reports suggest that this was either to build up the Astral Claw's own forces or to rebuild those of the Tiger Claws. Anyway, while this legal battle smoulders in the background, the Astral Claws go on the offensive. They come to the aid of nearby worlds, they tip the tide and win the nearby Fourth Quadrant Rebellion, and eventually they combine with a Black Templar's Crusader fleet to push further into the Maelstrom than any Imperial force had ever gone. However, midway through this push, the Black Templars are retasked to the Ultramar sector, and stripped of resources by the Imperium yet again, the Warder chapters are forced to withdraw. By 901, the ongoing legal...
Man, can you imagine that? You know, being in charge of all of this, having this glorious push into the Maelstrom to potentially close it. You're having victory after victory, only to then have your primary backing force be redirected. You know, I don't know if... I know the Templars kind of work with a little bit more autonomy, but I still think they do answer to, like, a certain section of the Inquisition, and I think even drawing a blank here, but there is they still do answer to, you know, parts of the Inquisition and other parts of the Imperium, and I think they were originally part of. It was Sigismund that formed him, and he was like Dorn's right hand guy, if I remember correctly. So I mean, they might even still kind of answer to that part of that chain. You know, they might still kind of fall in line with some of the stuff of what's left of Dorn's Legion. So, you know, I wonder if it was just a situation where the Imperium themselves like purposely retasked them, or if something just came up and they had to leave. But I mean, that like, talk about, you know, defeat snatched from the jaws of victory. You know what I mean?
Legal disputes seem to be leaning in favour of the Carthan Administratum, and the ongoing legal disputes seem to be leaning in favour of the Carthan Administratum. And so, jumping on this, they dispatch an Assailants fleet to Badab to demand the missing tithe, the gene seed
That is a
submission,
weird looking
and
ship,
any
brother.
commandeered resources, like Corsair ships. As you can imagine, this isn't received well. The hugely powerful system defences of Badab demand the tithe fleet give way to the just authority of the system's
Okay, so what?
airships.
Trying to see what planet is like Badab Prime or whatever.
Well. The huge
Badab 5, or either, I guess, ships or stations in orbit. 2, Badab 3. Yeah, I don't see like the prime planet. Unless Badab 5 is considered the prime one or whatever, like the main one they're talking about.
Hugely powerful system defences of Badab demand the tithe fleet give way to the just authority of the system's masters. The tithe fleet demand the defences stand down in the name of the Emperor, and after a moment of panic, the Badab system defences awake and the fleet is destroyed. This causes huge local political fallout. The governor of the Carthago sector calls for censure against the Astral Claws and the arrest of Huron, but the Imperium at large ignores this. The Badab sector is regarded as a vital bulwark against the Maelstrom. The Carthans increase...
Okay, so yeah, the politics of it, you know, they don't want to... There's already tensions there with the Astral Claws and whatnot. They don't want to antagonize them further. They're basically like the first and last line of defense against anything that could come out of the Maelstrom. So the Imperium, I guess, oversight is kind of seemingly sitting back and just letting things play out, I guess, at the moment. Interesting.
The Badab sector is regarded as a vital bulwark against the Maelstrom. The Carthans, increasingly desperate, take matters into their own hands. 2 more fleets are sent into the Maelstrom zone. Both disappear, and the Carthan Imperial commanders begin to spread propaganda that the...
I wonder if the Carthans are based off of Carthage, you know, the one of the ancient enemies of Rome or whatever, if my history is correct. I haven't slept yet, so my brain's a little kind of out of it at the moment, but you know, the saying's Carthage, it's just, yeah, reminding me of Carthage, so I wonder if they're kind of based off of that.
Both disappear, and the Carthan Imperial commanders begin to spread propaganda that the Astral Claws and Huron himself are traitors. Incensed by this, in 903, Luft Huron issues the famous Articles of Just Secession, ratified by the Mantis Warriors and the Lamenters, which state that the whole Maelstrom zone will sever its ties from its neighbouring sectors to better protect the Imperium at large. The Carthans threaten war. They try to seek aid from the Departamento Minatorum and Navy, but are flatly refused and informed that the matter was an internal disagreement. They increase their PDF forces and convince their counterparts on the Maelstrom Zone Administratum base of Sagan to do the same. And finally, they send direct and open appeals to several Space Marine chapters to aid them in recovering the lost tithe and safeguarding their ships. The first to respond in 904 were the Firehawks.
It's kind of surprising that almost anyone would respond in certain ways, you know what I mean? Because, like, you know, it's like more forces is just going to escalate things, right? The more forces you bring there, and like, unless it's an overwhelming force kind of a situation, and then you could say, oh, like, yeah, we have overwhelming force, overwhelming numbers, you know, just back down, you can't win, you know, but otherwise, yeah, things are just going to keep escalating.
The Firehawks agree to investigate the lost shipping and send several ships into the Maelstrom zone. When the Firehawks ship Red Harbinger enters the Endymion cluster, it's intercepted by the Mantis Warriors, who order it to stand down. The Firehawks refuse, and the Mantis Warriors open fire and cripple the ship before boarding and capturing the Marines on board. While the Marines themselves are eventually returned in a tense standoff with the Firehawks battle group, the master of the Firehawks chapter, Stebord Lazarak, is furious and retasks the entire chapter fleet to the zone. Basing themselves at Sagan along with the Carthan fleet, they start to send probing attacks into the zone. When these failed, they tried to draw out the Mantis Warriors by sending the bulk of their chapter to attack Iblis in the Endymion cluster. However, this was anticipated by the secessionists, and while the Mantis Warriors pinned down the Firehawks on Iblis, the Lamenters and Astral Claws attacked and overwhelmed the administrating fortress world of Sagan, taking over the Tithe Fortress's vast stockpile of arms, munitions, and supplies. After this, the conflict became a running battle as the badly outnumbered Firehawks fell back until the arrival of the Marines Errant chapter, who were responding to the Firehawks' request for aid. The Marines Errant swiftly moved to secure shipping lanes, ignoring the Firehawks' calls for direct assault and avoiding open conflict, particularly with the Lamenters, who they recently fought alongside. Both chapters give quarter to each other numerous times, which annoys their allies. In late 904, word reaches the Loyalists that the Executioners chapter, who owe the Astral Claws an ancient blood debt, had dispatched a strike force to the Maelstrom zone to aid in its defense.
You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just things are escalating as more and more chapters are being brought in for one side or the other, and it's just going to keep escalating and escalating. It is pretty interesting, though.
In desperation, and with the Carthan Imperial commanders almost bankrupted by the dispute so far, the Carth Administratum attempt once again to harvest some of the tithed resources. They assembled a convoy of fleet and Marines Errant ships around the colossal freighter Cardinal Urdaneta, with the aim of punching through to the tithe depots on Viania. But Luft Huron and the Astral
Gargathia? That is a name, dude.
Claws were aware of the plan and ambushed the convoy after it had collected the tithes, taking 23 vessels as captive prizes.
Damn,
this
23 vessels.
Knocked the Carthans out of the war, and follow-up attacks by the Astral Claws against the Firehawks in the Golgothan Wastes, and by the Mantis Warriors against the Marines Errant on Bellerophon's Fall, decimated the Loyalist chapters and forced their retreat. By the end...
Okay, so they took Carthan, so wouldn't that mean the war is essentially over then, right? Because, like, that was the whole point. Like, they were fighting against the Carthans. Carthans kind of like started this thing. They've taken them. So what else is there to go on about? You know what I mean? Unless they then become the aggressors and push out and try to take even more territory against other chapters.
End of night on Bellerophon's Fall, decimated the Loyalist chapters and forced their retreat. By the end of 904, this border war was over, and the Maelstrom zone and its tithes remained firmly in control of the Maelstrom warders. However, with 5 chapters now in open conflict, the Imperium's high authorities finally decided to take action. They dispatched a delegation of Imperial Legate Inquisitors led by Inquisitor Jarndyce Frayne to investigate. After finding evidence of the lack of gene seed submissions and the attacks against Imperial shipping, the delegation demanded the unconditional ceasefire of all parties and for the warders to surrender. This was immediately rejected by Huron, who stated that standing down would leave the Maelstrom zone defenseless and his emperor-given charges naked before the enemy. From a legal dispute to a local feud, the Badab War had now become a conflict between the Imperium and all who stood with Luft Huron. After the judgment of the
So yeah, they could be then branded as like heretics, and they could just go all in if they really wanted to, right? I mean, they could essentially start propaganda, you know, throwing out propaganda that they've been corrupted by chaos, you know, et cetera, et cetera. They've joined the traitor legions. We need to go in and purge them and retake all this if they wanted to.
The Imperium and all who stood with Luft Huron. After the judgment of the legates was delivered, a force of Space Marine chapters was assembled from those in the area, consisting of elements from the Salamanders, Raptors, and Fire Angels,
OG Salamanders,
led by the Red Scorpions. The Firehawks and Marines are...
Red Scorpion, that's a good movie, by the way. I don't care what anyone has to say. Dolph Lundgren, 80s. It's kind of like the Russian version of Rambo. Watch it, you know. It's an older movie, but it still checks out.
and Fire Angels, and led by the Red Scorpions. The Firehawks and Marines Errant are stood down from frontline duties, but before they retire, the Firehawks return to the Endymion cluster and firebomb the Mantis Warriors' protectorate of Sacristan, wiping out more than 90% of the population in revenge for their loss at Iblis. The new Loyalist forces gathered at Josiah Quintus and started to push into the Maelstrom zone, along with fleet elements from Battlefleet Solar.
I really like how he has this stuff play out with the map, showing you the various forces, where they're stationed, their movement, stuff like that. This is stuff that I really like to see, you know, kind of how, like, you know, various documentary shows would do this, talking about old historical battles and stuff. I always loved that stuff. And so, like, seeing it played out like this in a similar fashion, but with Warhammer lore.
This led to the first big naval battle, the Battle of Silent Reach, between the Red Scorpions and Lamentor's fleets. Though no big gains are achieved, the secessionists are effectively contained by the fleets, and the Loyalists turn their attention towards Viania. The Firehawks and Raptors are moved into patrol and escort operations, while the Red Scorpions, Marines Errant and Fire Angels conduct raids on the Viania system, where they encounter the Tyrant's Legion for the first time. The Tyrant's Legion are the reformed PDF forces of the Maelstrom Zone, commanded.
Every time he says PDF, I can't help but think about, you know, a PDF file. I don't know. I worked in IT for over 15 years, so that's just immediately where it goes. I'm like, PDF? What the fuck are you talking about? PDFs, bro.
For the first time. The Tyrant's Legion are the reformed PDF forces of the Maelstrom Zone, commanded by elements of the Astral Claws, and they effectively hold against the raids. At the same time, advanced elements of the Executioners chapter arrive and start to disrupt Loyalist supply lines, while forces loyal to Huron take over the independent fortress world of Suangrad from within. At this point, the secessionists called a parley, an abandoned asteroid base in the Grief system, in order to avoid...
Okay, so they called a parley to try to calm things down here, and I guess maybe open negotiations. Interesting.
It's called a parley, an abandoned asteroid base in the Grief system, in order to avoid further bloodshed between those who should be
Betrayal at Grief.
Attended by the Tyrant of Badab, Luft Huron, Red Scorpion's Lord High Commander Ortis, and the Mantis Warriors Chapter Master Sartak, the discussions quickly broke down into accusations and calls for trial. But as the two sides adjourned, three unknown vessels broke from concealment in a nearby gas giant and attacked the base, destroying it and killing Ortis and Sartak. This became known as the Betrayal at Grief, and all sides blamed the other. The Loyalists said it was a plot by Huron, while the secessionists laid blame squarely at the door of the Inquisition.
Now, he said unknown, right? Let me rewind this.
Calls for trial. But as the two sides adjourned, three unknown vessels broke from concealment in a nearby gas giant and attacked the base, destroying...
Huh, interesting. So I wonder if it is a situation where one side was planning to do this to the other, or if a third party was just trying to instigate the matter to escalate the war for whatever benefit, you know. Because, like, I'm trying to think, like, I guess unless the attack happened quickly and they weren't able to get a reading on the types of ships, right, they would know whether it's like, okay, these are Chaos ships or these are Xeno ships or whatever. So being, I guess, that isn't stated, you would think that that would imply that these are other quote unquote loyalists, Imperial ships that are firing on them. I wonder if it becomes known who did this or not and what their motivation for it is.
Known vessels broke from concealment in a nearby gas giant and attacked the base, destroying it and killing Ortis and Sartak. This became known as the Betrayal at Grief, and all sides blamed the other. The Loyalists said it was a plot by Huron, while the secessionists laid blame squarely at the door of the Inquisition, claiming it as an assassination attempt. After the loss of Ortis, the Loyalist commander, secessionist raids increased until the appointment of Karab Cullen as the new Lord Commander of the Red Scorpions, which coincided with the arrival of
looks like a Grey Knight.
Howling Griffins, Nova Marines, and Sons of Medusa. At this point, the Marines Errant were again moved into reserve before withdrawing entirely. Towards the end of 906, the Loyalists capitalised on gains in the Maelstrom Zone with the construction of Vengeance Station on Hallows Point, protected by the Firehawks fleet against Lamenter's raids, and the first attacks on Secessionist shipping by the Red Scorpions and Raptors. The Nova Marines and Sons of Medusa probed into the Endymion cluster, resulting in the garrisoning of the Chimera system by the Howling Griffins. This allowed the Loyalists to push forward into the Garganthea system, where the Raptors, Salamanders and Fire Angels fought the Astral Claws and Mantis Warriors amongst the tangled vegetation.
And it seems like the Loyalist sides are just starting to overwhelm the Secessionists. I can't really help but, like, think about Star Wars and, you know, the prequels and the, you know, fights between the Republic and whatever they were called. I can't think of what they were called now, but the Trade Alliance Federation or whatever the fuck they were called. Well, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but anyway, yeah, I don't know. It just seems like now that the Secessionists are starting to get overwhelmed.
Capitalising on the Loyalist gains, the Raptors and Salamanders moved to retake Cerngrad via a series of covert operations led by the Raptors, and the planet was quickly rebuilt and garrisoned by the Salamanders. At the start of 907, the bulk of the Executioners chapter arrived in the zone and immediately conducted a series of raids against the Howling Griffins at Chimera, destroying much of the system defences but stopping short of annihilating the Loyalists. However, these secessionist gains didn't last long. In mid-907, an Orc War from the Kalar system disrupted secessionist plans, pushing in as far as Endymion itself and forcing the Mantis Warriors to pull back and...
That's convenient. That's convenient. Orcs just happen to come in from flank, forcing the Mantises to have to pull back to protect their flanks, giving up territory. Convenient.
Counter-invade, pushing in as far as Endymion itself and forcing the Mantis Warriors to pull back and counter-invade. The Astral Claws also had to pull back from the front line to combat Corsair cults on Magog. At the same time, the Minotaurs entered the conflict, immediately launching a full-scale attack on Cairo, wiping out Tyrant's Legion forces and then marauding through the Pale Stars and Demons.
Minotaurs don't fuck around, huh?
Their own list of targets. While a huge boon to the Loyalist forces, they only ever reported back to the Imperial legates and largely conducted their own war in the southern zone, coming into conflict with the Executioners, who had stationed themselves temporarily in the Deanstellar Drift. Secessionist losses continued at Galen, where the Salamanders and Fire Angels dislodged a force of Astral Claws, and at Viania, where continued raids by the Red Scorpions and a relief force of Minotaurs finally
not looking
wiped
good for
out
the
Secessionists.
Secessionists.
In early 908, the Secessionists attempted to turn the tide by recovering buried weapons stores on the dead hive world of Signax. That's the world that was destroyed hundreds of years ago and started the whole story. But the Loyalists, dispatching the Sons of Medusa and the newly arrived Exorcist, commenced a brutal campaign to scour out the Astral Claws. However, the fractious Sons of Medusa pursued their own ends throughout the war, and the Exorcists were recalled and their forces added to what became the largest Loyalist push of the campaign: the retaking of Sagan. The mass strength of the Fire Angels, Red Scorpions and Exorcists, supported by the Nova Marines, Raptors and Salamanders, fought through a maze of storage compounds as the Astral Claws launched last-ditch defences using suicide attacks and viral weapons. However, the Loyalists won, and Sagan became their primary base in the Maelstrom Zone. At this point, judging the Secessionists to be contained, the Raptors, Nova Marines and Howling Griffins were withdrawn and redeployed. Officially, this was because of an Orc War in the Ultima segmentum, but unofficially, it was because all three chapters were considered too nice to push on and destroy the Secessionists. Instead, outsider chapters like the Sons of Medusa and Exorcists were reinforced. By mid-908, the Loyalists, noticing that the bulk of the Lamenters chapter was being used to guard the southern flank of the Badab sector against the Pale Stars, started to gather the Minotaurs chapter in strength nearby. They captured the Lamenters' Geneseed storage vessel, the Mater Lacrimarum, and used it as bait, drawing in the rest of the Lamenters' forces and destroying them. Only 311 Lamenters
aren't fucking around, brother.
Turned in a prison hulk for the rest of the war. The Loyalists secured another victory at Angstrom. The Forge World of Angstrom had stayed independent for the duration of the war, insisting on delivering its tithe of material to Imperial representatives every 3 years, regardless of if those representatives were Loyalist or Secessionist. Until now, they've been Secessionist. In late 908, an infiltrating Red Scorpions and Salamanders force attacked the handover of the equipment on Angstrom 8, causing as much damage as possible and scoring a major strategic victory. However, the outbreak of hostilities within their system angered the Mechanicus, who launched retaliatory raids on Galen.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, I guess from one point of view, you could look at it as, A, we need to keep them from getting supplies. We've got them in a chokehold. We can't like let them get any kind of supplies from anyone. But on the other, point of view, you're risking provoking the Mechanicus, and that's a whole other potentially big ally with a Forge World right there, coming in and aiding them, whether it just be by supplies or like actual entering fights. Giving them troops and mechanized units, etc. I feel like that was probably a bad move.
Of hostilities within their system angered the Mechanicus, who launched retaliatory raids on Galen and Iblis, and Cullen was forced to dispatch the reserved Fire Angels forces to blockade the Angstrom system for the rest of the war. By the end of 909, the secessionists only held out in...
See, now that's just a whole other, chapter group, whatever, that has to sit there and babysit the Mechanicus instead of being a part of any actual battles. Those are people that you got to hold in that. Those are resources that are being put elsewhere instead of towards the actual main fight.
In the Endymion cluster and the Badab sector itself. In the Endymion cluster, the Mantis warriors were conducting a hit-and-run campaign against the Fire Angels and Sons of Medusa, while the bulk of the Astral Claws forces and fleet elements were within the Badab sector itself. The Executioner's base of operations in the Deanstellar Drift was intact, but the Executioners themselves refused to operate under the direct control of the Tyrant of Badab, operating only as allies to disrupt loyalist activity. Galen had seen a lot of fighting and had switched sides multiple times during the campaign, and at the start of 910, Carab Cullen redirected the bulk of the Sons of Medusa, along with inquisitorial oversight, to make sure that could never happen again. The Sons of Medusa conducted a terror campaign, landing in the capital and massacring the populace. The rest of the settlements on the planet started to surrender within 56 hours, and Galen was left an inquisitorial prison world. Around the same time, the first advanced ships...
There's a lot of fucking... secondary shit happening to a lot of, innocent people going on in these worlds, man. Places getting destroyed and burnt down, populace is just getting wiped out because, worlds that had people on there now getting turned into prison worlds and shit. Like, damn.
Arrived from the Karkarodon Astra at the head of a full fleet advancing beyond the Golgothan.
My boys,
they were
the space sharks,
directly to the Endymion cluster in the hope of...
It's so 80s, man. I love it. I really do. Like space sharks. It's so 80s. I forget what they were called. I don't know if it's like battle beasts or something like that, but it just reminds me of, I don't know. When I was little, I think they were called battle beasts. I don't know. I could look it up at some point in time. I'm not going to do it right now. But anyway, there was like some kind of like little action figure toys or whatever, and they tried to like, each toy had its own like element, fire, water, wind, earth, wood, metal, blah blah blah, and there was like a rock paper scissors system on who would beat who, so you could like collect them and have your little wars and whatnot going on. And I don't know, just hearing the space sharks just reminds me of that stuff. But I mean, it's such an 80s thing, space sharks. I love it, dude.
Advancing beyond the Golgothan wastes. They were deployed directly to the Endymion cluster in the hope of countering the guerrilla activities of the Mantis warriors, and this Tranquility campaign fell first on the Sigard system, where the Karkarodons destroyed its colonies and plundered resources and war material, before moving on to Iblis and then Endymion Prime itself. Ignoring the Fire Angels still holding out on the planet, the Karkarodons commenced a colossal drop pod assault, turning the entire planet into a battlefield. The Mantis warriors refused to retreat from Endymion Prime and were brought to battle again and again by the Karkarodons, each time returning with fewer Marines. By the end of 910, the Mantis warriors had ceased to exist as an effective fighting force, and the Fire Angels, angered by the conduct of the Karkarodons, were withdrawn from the campaign. The Karkarodons split their fleet to reinforce the Minotaurs and Red Scorpions in expectation of the invasion of the Badab sector.
Oh Lord, 9/11.
As the Tranquility campaign came to a close in 9/11, the Minotaurs and Sons of Medusa, backed by penal regiments newly raised from Galen, had moved to assault Isin on the southern edge of the Badab sector, while the Red Scorpions and Exorcists marshalled forces at Sagan. After intercepting
going in.
secessionist communications, a combined force of Salamanders and Minotaurs would...
I wish you would kind of zoom out and give us an overview of how everything is now to see like where the succession is, because I think it's just that one little area. I think this is just like the last bastion of what the secessionist forces have, because like this is the Badab section or sector, etc. So I think like this is it. Like once this falls, that's the end. So
Badab sector, while the Red Scorpions and Exorcists marshalled forces at Sagan. After intercepting secessionist communications, a combined force of Salamanders and Minotaurs were dispatched to Shaprias in the Lamptan system on the edge of the Maelstrom, where they discovered vast Astral Claws training camps. After assaulting the camps, fighting through hordes of savages and mutants, and descending into the catacombs below, they encountered the first Astral Claws corpse taker apothecaries and huge stores of gene seed recovered from the bodies of loyalists and secessionists alike. However, as they returned with the news from Lamptan, the Salamander's ship Pyre of Glory was caught in a warp squall and becalmed on the edge of the Maelstrom zone. Its requests for aid were intercepted by a small secessionist ship carrying the Astral Claws Arch-Centurion Karnak Commodus, who in turn requested aid in taking it on. When the Executioner's flagship, Phaeton's Wrath, answered, both ships fell on the Salamanders, leaving them crippled and accepting their surrender. However, as the Executioners and Salamanders gathered to formalise the surrender, Commodus led a boarding assault into the Pyre of Glory in an attempt to access and steal the Salamander's gene seed. Furious at the dishonour, the Executioners turned on their allies and slaughtered the Astral Claws before withdrawing back to their base in the Deanstellar Drift. Damn,
shit's just going down everywhere now.
The Lamenters, the Mantis Warriors, and the Executioners now removed from the conflict, the Astral Claws were truly alone, and Lufthuron became more and more erratic. Symbols of the Imperium were destroyed, and the Badab sector truly turned renegade. At the end of 9/11, the invasion of the Badab sector started. Cullen had already set up secondary fronts at Isin and Disabilis, with Red Scorpions, Exorcists, and Minotaurs forces conducting raids into the sector, but the first major assault was on the Piraeus system. On the second moon of Critias, Carab Cullen and Lufthuron met in personal conflict, both wounding each other, and the Loyalist forces are trapped on the surface before the Imperial Navy managed to turn the tide and defeat the secessionist fleet, attempting a daring extraction. In the aftermath, both forces claimed victory. For the secessionists, Piraeus was defended, but at the cost of their fleet. For the Loyalists, they destroyed a huge proportion of the secessionist forces, and with the space lanes open, they were now in position to press the attack.
Damn, this shit's going on for a while too.
At the start of 9/12, the Maelstrom zone...
I think what they said, it started in 903, so I mean this has been going on for 9 years now, I think.
Was still not considered totally pacified, and hundreds of small skirmishes broke out around the region, with only the presence of the Sons of Medusa and the Minotaurs keeping loyalist supply lines open, and garrison duties left to thinly spread Imperial Guard and Inquisitorial forces. In addition, it looked like the Tyrant's forces were pulling back from Isin and Disabilis and concentrating their defence on Badab itself, while renegade bands of Astral Claws attempted escape into the Maelstrom. The Loyalists needed to push their advance, but with the news of the surrender of the Mantis Warriors, the departure of reinforcements from the Star Phantoms, and, due to diplomatic work by the Inquisition, imminent reinforcement from the Adeptus Mechanicus of Angstrom, they elected to strengthen the blockade around the Badab sector, the linchpin of this being the Firehawk's massive battle barge Rapturous Rex. In the meantime, the Carcharodons and the Sons of Medusa departed into the Deanstellar Drift to hunt the Executioners, but as the Sons of Medusa clashed with the Executioners' ships, the Salamanders forced a parley, and the Executioners agreed to stand down until the end of the war. In 913, the Star Phantoms chapter arrived at full strength along with a maniple of battle titans from Legio Crucis.
Oh shit.
And the final siege of Badab began. The Ring of Steel, the defences surrounding Badab, was breached by the genius of the Mechanicus of Angstrom, as they utilised the Rapturous Rex to tow and fire a burning stellar core into the primary control fortress of Sentinel Sigma, as Sons of Medusa and Exorcist boarding teams assaulted the burning...
Okay, this is... We're zoomed out now. The Badab 1, is this the primary planet? It doesn't seem like it. This seems like a death planet. Or maybe this is a hive planet, and that's why it looks like that. But it seems like this is like super close to the sun, so I don't know. Anyway.
Station, the Minotaurs, as Sons of Medusa and Exorcist boarding teams assaulted the burning station, the Minotaurs carried out strikes against Badab Secundus and
Bro, the Minotaurs and the Space Sharks?
Their military
Minotaurs.
Finally,
this is the way he's saying it is affecting me. But the Minotaurs and the Space Sharks, they're not fucking around, brother. They're like, yeah, they're going in.
Badab Secundus and Rygiel, decapitating their military commands. Finally, as Sons of Medusa forces gained control of the Ring of Steel, the outer Badab system became a sea of fire. The guns of Badab itself were still to be feared, and so the assault was split in three. The Star Phantoms, Sons of Medusa and Firehawks seized control of the High Guard, the old Astral Claws fortress monastery in orbit around Badab Primaris. And as orbital bombardment from this and the Loyalist fleet commenced, the Carcharodons deployed in full strength into the hives of Badab to sow terror, while the bulk of the Star Phantoms landed troops and titans and laid siege to the Palace of Thorns. The slow grind pushed on all day and night until, on the second day, the Carcharodons dispatched strike teams to the hive's subsurface.
They went in
and sabotaged and overloaded the ancient atomic reactors that powered the hives. As the surface of Badab Primaris started to crack and break, the Carcharodons pulled back to orbit, and as the guns fell silent, the Star Phantoms pushed forward into the palace. Captains Rukal Androcles...
Interesting. So, okay, they sent in the Space Sharks to take out the power grid, essentially. They took out the nuclear reactors, powering the hive cities, and probably powering down any kind of defenses. Although you would think the defenses would probably have some kind of backup generators or whatever. They'd be self-sustainable in some way. So they go and take out the power, retreat, and now, who did they say?
Primaris started to crack.
The Phantoms, the Space Phantoms coming in.
And as the guns fell silent, the Star Phantoms pushed forward into the palace.
Gotcha.
Captains Rukal Androcles was mortally wounded in single combat with Lufthuron within the palace. But the Tyrant of Badab and a small force of...
Didn't Lufthuron also duel a couple other people and come out on top? From what he was saying, if I remember right. So, I mean... Man sounds like he can hold his own then, if that's the case.
In single combat with Lufthuron within the palace. But the Tyrant of Badab and a small force of Astral Claws escaped as the planet collapsed and loyalist and secessionist forces alike attempted to flee to orbit. The Badab War was over.
So did the planet... Is he saying the planet literally collapsed in upon itself? Like, was destroyed from the actual firepower going on the planet?
In the aftermath, the Astral Claws were declared traitors most foul, and the other secessionist chapters guilty of breaking with the ancient covenants of the Codex Astartes. They were sentenced to complete...
So I wonder, did the Astral Claws, like, did they fall back into the warp and then become, like, actual, like, Chaos Legions?
Chapters guilty of breaking with the ancient covenants of the Codex Astartes. They were sentenced to complete 100-year-long crusades to atone. The Mantis warriors lost their dominion of the Endymion cluster to the Firehawks, and the Star Phantoms were given control over the Badab sector itself. And that's the Badab War, an example of how fractured the Imperium can become. What started as mismanagement turned into heresy, mostly through the actions of the Imperium itself. That was the story as it stands in the recent Imperial armor books, but as I said, I have another video where I go through the history of Badab in the game, from the very first time it appeared in Rogue Trader. Have a look if you're interested. Thanks for watching.
Awesome. That was a really good video. I like that video. Okay, he's got nothing more here at the end. Wanted to make sure. But I like that video. That was a really good video. As always, links will be down below in the description for this original video without my commentary, reaction, etc. if you want to watch that, and to Arbitor Ians' channel, which I again would encourage you to go over there and check out his channel. He's got a lot of 40k stuff. He definitely deserves the subs and any kind of support you can give him. He's a very good content creator. Yeah, I liked how he really did this video, the explanation of everything, breaking down year by year, And like I had said earlier, I really liked how he kind of broke down the various chapter troop movements, etc., throughout the various systems as they were taken, kind of like how it's done, you know, and, you know, Discovery Channel documentaries going over, you know, historical wars and stuff like that. I really like that. And it's interesting. It was really interesting to see how the successionists were really winning for quite a long time. Pushed other factions out. They even took over Carthus and essentially eradicated them, and really were winning the sector, and even at one point in time had the support of the Templars, and were also kind of pushing into the warp at one point in time. But then eventually the Inquisition got involved, and them seeing how much of the tithes weren't actually being processed and done properly, they were branded heretics. And then more of the full might of the Imperium got involved, and from that point on it kind of really fell back. I still wonder who it was, because he didn't explain it further. You know, it was said at one point in time there was a parlay that happened between the successionists and the Inquisition and the Imperium, and it was broken up by an unknown third party of ships that came in and fired on them, and people were killed on both sides, I believe. So, and that just kind of escalated the conflict even further, to the point where there was no hope of negotiation. So I wonder, like, who really was that did that, and what their motivation was behind that. You know what I mean? But very good video, very good video. I love these kind of videos, going over the wars and the troop movements and all that kind of stuff. And it's really interesting to see that, you know, there is, you know, another kind of Civil War event that happened, but it's not one on such a giant, you know, galactic scale with such lasting impacts like the Horus Heresy was. And it's also just nice to see it involving or being centered around essentially more political, logistical issues. And essentially the Imperium kind of, like you said, collapsing in and on itself and causing and being its own worst enemy kind of a situation. So anyway, like I said, links will be down below in the description. Great video by Arbitor Ian. If you would like to, you can hit the join button down below. Take a look at my YouTube membership benefits, see if any of those tiers would have any interest to you. I do a lot of these reactions live, and we have a lot of discussions with my members. There's Discord if you would like to join the Discord. We have a lot of discussions there, and that's open to everyone, etc., etc. So if any of that has an issue, take a look at it. Regardless, if you enjoyed this video, do consider leaving a like and a sub, as it would greatly help me and it would help the channel grow, and I greatly appreciate it. Regardless of all that, I just appreciate your time. If you're still watching this here with me at the end of the video, thank you very much for taking the time to do so. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're having yourselves a wonderful day whenever you're watching this. Thank you very much, and I'll see you guys on the next.